Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. I'm your host Lorfarius, and in today's episode, which is number 44, we will be taking a look at Flashback. And before we jump right into the game, let's take a look at this week's news. Now, strangely enough, it has been quite busy in the Amiga community. There's a fair old chunk of stuff that's been happening. Now, first up is something I noticed a few days ago. There is a Kickstarter for a new up-and-coming re-release of an original Amiga game called Minskies-Furballs by the Big Box Gaming Company. Now, when I looked at this, there was about 20 days to go. They need £13,247, currently up to 1,583. It's only been running for several days, but I'll just read a bit of the blurb. Our first project is Minskies-Furballs, a puzzle game similar to Tetris Attack or Street Fighter Puzzle Fighter. Minskies-Furballs was developed and released for the early Amiga computers. However, it was never released for the CD-TV and CD32. In addition, Minskies was developed for MS-DOS systems, but due to the publisher entering the Amiga market late in its life, which brought poor sales for Minskies on Amigas, the DOS version of Minskies was cancelled. We aim for our projects to be compatible with a variety of computer platforms like Windows, Mac and the later Amiga systems, CD32 and CD-TV, on an all-in-one compact disc compatible with all the targeted systems. Now, this seems to be doing fairly well, having only just started. It's also got full support by a chap called Guru Larry. I'm sure you're quite familiar with him in the retro scene. He's a pretty big name by now. But yeah, it looks quite interesting. I will stick a link to that up in the show notes. We don't get a lot of projects like this, official sort of releases for the Amiga and stuff, so it's the sort of thing that needs some support. Now, just something a little bit of fun that I saw on the Twitter account the other day, posted by Dino. Trudging through the Manchester traffic, listening to AMIGArama pod. Could see the old ocean building whilst listening to Rainbow Islands music. Time flies when you're having fun. And he actually took a picture of his in-car dash, like displaying the podcast episode playing. How cool is that, you know, being so close to the original ocean building? I don't know what it is these days. It's nothing interesting. I think it's just a bunch of offices. It might even be a shop. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, what a cool thing to do. If anybody wants to take more pictures of funny places where they're listening to the podcast, by all means do it and chuck it on the Facebook page or the Twitter account, and we'll have a look at them or a chat about it. Just quite entertaining, and it did make me chuckle. We have over 40 episodes now for the podcast. I think it's coming on in leaps and bounds. The further we get, the bigger the episodes get, and there's a lot more work involved and stuff. One thing I have been doing for a while is trying to come up with a replacement theme tune, like the opening soundtrack and the finishing. Now, I don't really know much about like music in any way, shape or form. The best instrument I can even claim to play is the triangle, but if you want to listen to 30 seconds of me clanging away on a triangle, I'm quite happy to give that a go. But I have had this idea of maybe getting the theme song that we do have and maybe playing that through an Amiga or some sort of Amiga software, you know, converting a WAV or an MP3 to do that into like a mod file format. And then 16-bitting the sound. And I might be saying something completely ridiculous there, but I did put a post out on the Facebook page the other day, and Douglas Compton came forward with a great suggestion, and he says, why not just put a post out to the community and just ask in general. He had a few ideas himself because he is running his own little like a 10-minute podcast. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. He's only just started, but it's quite entertaining, and I just thought, yeah, what a great idea. If anybody's listening and they've got any sort of skill at playing instruments or making music on the Amiga, I mean, you've heard the theme tune, if you can maybe want to do a version of that, or even if you've got a good idea for something you might think would suit the show itself, then by all means get in touch, because I'd really like to replace the main theme eventually, because again, it's just something I bought off a general site. It sounds great. I've spent ages trying to find that one, but I'm always trying to come up with ideas to expand the show a bit more and make it more original and just based off something that we're all involved in. So yeah, drop me a line. I'm sure that we all have favourite retro games, something that we like going back to time after time after time. And for me, one classic game, and no matter what system I get, I will always try and see if there's a version of Flashback on it to play. It's just always stood out in my mind as like the perfect mix of like platform action, bit of adventure and sci-fi with some great storytelling mixed in. Now there has been a re-release of this on the Nintendo Switch recently, which has sort of put it in my mind. And the fact that we did Prince of Persia several weeks ago, now which was a very good game in itself, and it's clear to see that this was based off the back of that. It had a lot to build off and they really have done quite a lot with it. But every single time I keep coming back to this one game. I'm not even sure why. It just works so perfectly on every system I've ever seen it on. And there are a lot of differences with music and stuff, but of course I'm doing an Amiga podcast, so it just seems the perfect game to go back to and cover properly. Now, it was published by US Gold, who were responsible for Another World, which some people seem to think it's sort of a semi-sequel to. It's not really. It was made by, I think, a completely different team. It's not even the same guys. It just has this same sort of style to it, which works quite well. They also did Final Fight, which has got a terrible Amiga version for. I did try covering this in the early episodes of AMIGArama, but I couldn't actually get a working copy of a ROM to do any sort of video footage for it, so I ended up giving up, but I did try for several weeks. Since then, I have managed to play an original disc copy, and it's absolutely dreadful. Probably worth going back to just for that. They also did Street Fighter 2, Strider, a lot of arcade games, all the Outruns on the Amiga, lots and lots of the LucasArts games, so Monkey Island and stuff, Day of the Tentacle, I suppose, things like that. It was developed by Delphine Software International, who also did Another World, Castle Werner, I can't even read my own notes there, Future Wars, which is a very good graphic adventure game, Cruise for a Corpse, lots of this style of artistic visionary game, I suppose. I'm not exactly how to put that correctly. Anyway, it came out in 1992 and was on a total of 4 floppy disks. Now, it's only a single player game. It was hard drive installable, which was not actually common at the time, and it was a 1 meg game. It was priced at £29.99, and you would expect something like this would be re-released on the Amiga 1200 in AGA, but sadly there is no upgraded or updated AGA version, which is quite a miss really, because you'd expect something like maybe a CD32 version later on, but there's nothing fancy like that. This is as good as it gets. Now, there are a few coders involved in this. Benoist Aaron, who was responsible for games like Bad Dudes, Cruise for a Corpse, Tennis Cup, which I think is a very famous Amiga tennis game, might be wrong there, Operation Wolf, that's probably quite good, Dragon Ninja, all the arcadey types. Then there was another 2, Thierry, I cannot pronounce that, Lavostra, and also Thierry Perret. God, I'm sorry, I just can't pronounce these French names, but they're responsible for games like Cable, Pang, which is a very, very good Amiga run and gun with bubbles. Don't even know why I'm describing that. Everyone knows what Pang is, surely. Plotting, which I think is a sort of a puzzle game, a bit like Bubble Bobble, or no, it's not like Bubble Bobble. What am I talking about? Cruise for a Corpse again, Geisha, I have no idea what that is, but it sounds interesting. The graphics were created by 7 different people. Now, I was half tempted to write down all their names, but then I suddenly realised that would be insane, so I've just scribbled down a few of the games. Cruise for a Corpse, that's a very, very big Delphine Software game at the time. Night Hunter, Future Wars again, Pang, Cabal, the James Bond graphic adventure game. That does look quite interesting, even though it's an early graphic adventure. I mean, it's one I'm tempted to go back to because it's supposed to be quite an adult adventure game for the time. The music was done by Raphael Gescois. I'm really sorry. He did music for Jimmy's Fantastic Journey, Snow Brothers. Now, Flashback is just a plain old Amiga port. The original music for the game was created by Fabrice Viscero and Jean Baudlot, but Raphael reconverted this over from the original, which was a Sega Mega Drive game. Originally, it was designed by Paul Cussit. He'd done games like Cruise for a Corpse, Future Wars, very much computerized type person, but this was solely based around the Sega Genesis Mega Drive. Originally it was meant to be released as a science fiction game, also an adaptation of the Godfather films, but placed in space, and I couldn't quite believe that when I actually read it. But the entire idea that it was going to be set in the future, effectively following on from the world of the films, but US Gold pushed for it to be its own thing. Quite luckily, I'm sure. Now, one thing you'll notice, especially if you're playing the game in depth and the further you go on into it, there are a lot of sections in this based around jobs and careers and things where you're effectively doing things which sound very similar to the sort of stuff you do for the mob. So they have sort of lifted their own idea and then reinforced it into something more futuristic, but as a separate title. It would have been very, very strange as a Godfather game, but you can sort of see what they were going for, and it has come across to some degree within Flashback. Now, for the animation, they did use the same rotoscope technique, which was from Prince of Persia and Another World, and they did actually say that they were a source of inspiration for the game, but all the scenes in this one were actually drawn in polygons, drawn frame by frame, mixed in with the rotoscoping. And because of this, it was a huge task for them to do, because they wanted a film-like experience, and that animation was pretty much the only way you were going to get that sort of thing. I mean, just as an example, the main character alone, Conrad, has over 1,000 frames of animation just for simple things like running backwards and forward and his movement. There was really nothing like it at the time, and they went well above and beyond of what was done in like the original Prince of Persia and Another World. The game does have an incredible amount of world building, and the reason that came about is because they wanted to have lots of smaller story elements but in a much bigger universe, and the way they've done this is like with the environments and the things that happen around you, and you always feel like you're part of an environment that's this whole world is happening whilst you're just having your little adventure in a very small section. They've done a brilliant job, especially compared to games that would have been out at the time, because there really wasn't anything like it. Now, it was ported to the 3DO, the Acorn, the Apple Mac, the Atari Jaguar, FM Towns, I think Marty, Super Nintendo, DOS, Philips CDI, Sega Mega Drive, which is the original, the Amiga CD version, which I think used some of the 3DO scene because it was a much later release, or maybe I've got that a bit mixed up. But it also had a 3D sequel much later on called Fade to Black on the PS1, and that might have been a PC version as well. I know I did mention the Nintendo Switch version earlier, which came with an absolutely terrible re-release. Not of the actual game, but it was supposed to be like a collector's limited edition to about 40,000 copies. And effectively what they gave you was this really shoddy Super Nintendo type box, which wouldn't actually fit the game manual or the actual game. Everything's really oversized and not the correct dimensions at all. But the actual game is really good because it's a rebuild of the original game, but they've added the option to play it just as it was originally, but also with extra filters on, and you can flick between the two filters, a bit like what they did with Secret on Monkey Island very many years ago. Now, sadly, there was a Steam re-release where the original team or designer came back and redid the game just on the PC to come out. It was really touted at the time to be something special, and he basically used the core design of the original and then jazzed it all up with the graphics and things. And I think it was made in like the Unreal Engine or something to that, some technical thing on modern day PCs at the time. I think this came out around 2012-13, but it was absolutely terrible. Completely missed the point of the original game. It did not look nice at all. The animation was terrible. It didn't work. It was buggy. It was a complete horror show to play. It really was. I actually bought a copy at the time, and it's one of my most annoying regrets because the amount of times I've played this game on different systems, and I ended up going to that expecting something a bit special, and it was very disappointing. And one thing I did forget to mention earlier, especially to do with the animation, that this was one of the first games ever to use a screen mode of 256 pixels, which to you non-technical people might not sound like anything special, but for the time this allowed like an extra level of detail, something that any other game at the time just weren't capable. Even Another World, which is probably the closest type of thing to this, didn't use this sort of animation or that many pixels, so we really are in for something special with this game. With that out of the way, let's move on to the game's story. Now, the game opens with Conrad B. Hart fleeing down a corridor from a pair of men armed with lasers. Conrad jumps onto a hoverbike to evade his assailants. However, a much larger transport soon gives chase and quickly blasts Conrad's vehicle out of the sky. After a brief search of the crash area, the armed transport flies off, leaving Conrad for dead in the depths of an unknown jungle. Conrad awakens the next day in an alien jungle on a planet known as Titan, with no memory of events prior to the chase, and in a typical amnesia plot to make anyone groan, he awakens and knocks a cube-shaped object off a ledge and sets out to retrieve it. Hunting the cube down, it contains a message recorded by Conrad before he lost his memory. He gives no clues as to what has happened, but tells him to seek out his friend Ian, who is located in New Washington. It's pretty much a bait and switch story. You're dumped in the middle of the jungle, you don't know what's going on, it's up to you to work your way out and explore the world. Now, you do start the game in the jungle itself. It's surrounding you, nice and green, lush trees and plants and backgrounds to go with it, platform surrounding the character. He's just standing there. It displays a level password in the top left corner. It's nice and simple. There's no sort of HUD, there's no information or anything like that, though you do see a small icon for the current item that you are holding. Basically, Conrad is in his jeans and a nice nifty leather jacket. In some versions, I think the shirt he's wearing is actually pink. That was very forward thinking, I think, for the time, because I don't think that was a common sort of top. I think they were sort of going for something futuristic yet modern and casual at the same time. You can of course open a sub menu just to select different items that he's carrying. There's lots of things that are dotted around the levels. That shows things off like credits, the current weapon you've got, a shield when you pick it up. Now, Conrad himself can run, jump, walk and roll. He's very gymnastic as a character. You know, he's incredibly flexible. You compare this to something like Prince of Persia, where he could run back and forth and do light jumps and things. Conrad can do much more than this. He can roll, he can pull out a weapon, he can roll with the weapon, you know, very James Bond style. It's actually pretty cool to duck down, whip out the gun and then roll across and start shooting at people. It looks cool, and there's nothing really quite like it, especially up to that point, and even in the coming years after. It was absolutely fantastic the way it was done. Now, he does move like a normal person, and what I mean by that is when you run forward and then turn backwards, it's not like in a standard platform game where he just whips round instantly. There is animation for him actually moving. It feels very natural and it looks fantastic the way they've done. Now, I said there was about 1,000 frames of animation, and you can see this all throughout the way the character moves. There is some momentum and gravity there. You have to wait for things to happen. It takes its time when he does certain stuff, and you might be thinking, oh well, that's going to be annoying, isn't it? Because, you know, like in a platform and stuff, you want to be moving backwards and forwards and instantly on the spot. But no, you need to take your time with this, because the animation, it requires it, and the world reacts the same. Whilst you're taking your time to turn around, the other character is exactly the same. There's no instant flick rounds and shooting and you're stuck slowly in the spot. The other characters are all exactly the same as you. You can of course run a fair old pace at speed. You can use the joystick to move backwards and forwards slowly. You tap it forward, you will start running, and at the end of the run, if you've got a good bit of distance, if you press jump, you will go flying, which is absolutely fantastic. And compare that to the original Prince of Persia, it does the same sort of thing. You need that time to work up to get some speed up. In this one, it just feels a lot more natural. It seems like he's much more responsive, and he will jump a fair old distance, and you can go flying way across the screen. There is the caveat that if you fall too far, you will die. So you can't be jumping up and springing all over the place. He isn't Mario, you can't be flinging yourselves around the levels without taking care. And there's a fair few points in the game when there's lots of like puzzle jumps type sections where you've got to take your time, do it slowly, do some big leaps. There is no section which is overly difficult like that. It doesn't break the game for you. You can usually work your way through, and a lot of the time when you fall down, there's enough opportunity to take a few steps back to retrace your steps and work your way through it properly. But it's quite impressive the amount of distance you cover and the leaps that you can actually do. One thing I have to mention, because it would be a crime if I didn't do it, the graphics in this game are just something else. Now, I did say in the Prince of Persia review how it was all very samey and basic, because, you know, it was quite an early game. The backgrounds matched where you were, the environments were suitable for that sort of Arabian-like castle, if you will, or fort, I don't know what you call it. But in this, there's lots and lots of different environments, and just even the opening jungle with all like the backgrounds and the lush green leaves and the way it all looks and the plant life and the way the characters all respond. It's not like a very boring platformer or stuff. It really does set this fantastic scene, and you've got that great animation going on. And then when you go further into the game and you're visiting places like cities and alien type areas and visiting like a different planet and stuff like that, it looks amazing. The attention to detail, especially when you get to the later places like the city environment, and it looks very Blade Runner-ish and neon and pulsing lights and lasers and things, and you even get to run through I'm jumping ahead of myself here, like a TV studio, like something out of The Running Man, that sort of an environment, and it looks absolutely fantastic. It looks the part, and I'd never really seen, especially up to the time, I think that's why it still appeals to me to this day, this sort of graphic detail. They really did go overboard. I mean, this is just an action platformer, bit of a shooter at the end of the day. It doesn't need all this, but it looks amazing. It certainly takes it to another level compared to, say, the likes of Prince of Persia. It offers something that other games just don't, especially for this time. It creates like a well lived in environment. A lot of it, like in these crumbling walls, and you'd think people actually could live in this environment. And I know it's a side on 2D view, but it's so convincing. They've done such a good job with the artwork. A lot of it, I suppose, it like compares to the graphic adventures, and those are very static and they don't move around much. I mean, this goes from screen to screen. It's not scrolling from left to right constantly, so there is that sort of limitation on it, but each screen is so well planned out, and the graphics work around the environment you're in and the platforms and stuff. It looks very convincing. In a style, in a way, it reminds me a lot of Beneath the Steel Sky, that sort of very futuristic look mixed in with Blade Runner. It works really well. Of course, all the characters and the enemies you come across, you do get a chance to talk to people. They are sort of like similar models, because these are people, even though they are aliens in a way. Doesn't that sound very weird? Everything's obvious to what it actually is, you know? You can see an enemy, you realise what it is. They're very well animated, everything has its own sort of pattern and movement, and you can work out what's what as you're exploring the levels. Even though it's slightly alien in places, you can still work out where you need to go and what you need to do. And of course, one of the biggest things about this is you are using a weapon to protect yourself, to take things out. There are lots of traps related to things like closed doors and pits and other baddies and things, but the best thing about this, in my opinion, is the gunplay, because it's absolutely amazing. Just the fact that you can stand there and whip out this gun, and he like pulls it out of his jacket, and you've got the animation, it takes time, and he whips it out and he's pointing, and you can spin around on the spot and stuff, and rolling left and right, and you can roll out on platforms into a roll or crawl on the floor, and then whip out the weapon and stuff on your knees. It looks amazing. It makes you feel like an action star when you're actually playing it. Again, I'd never seen anything like this at the time, and it's always stood out in my mind as being something really special. But the great thing is, it's really fun to be shooting things, because you can plan your way through the different stages of platforms. You can open the door and duck down and start firing, and they're firing back at you, and they've got lasers and things. You're shooting like crazy, and there's all the matching like sound effects and science fiction sound effects to go with that. But it's just convincing gunplay. I'd never really seen anything like it at the time, and I think it was years before games really started going that in depth with that level of sound and the way it actually responded to the characters and stuff. Each area doesn't have music per se. There are lots of like ambient sound effects, like not just the weapons, clunks and clicks and drips and things. Each area it matches as it should. I mean, it's annoying in a way that there's not much in the way of music, but there's enough going on to keep you distracted that it doesn't become too much of a distraction. Now, each area that you visit, and there's a fair few of them because there's several levels, they have lots and lots to do. A big push throughout this is getting jobs and earning money for the mafia type environment and working your way through the world, because you're effectively earning money to get like a ticket to travel to different areas. And originally I think that was meant to be the mafia time with the Godfather, because you'd be moving up through the mafia to get to the top. In this it's set out, there's a basic task really, you need to get from one place to one place to another, because you're trying to get from A to B. But you do get to talk to lots of different people. The conversations are amazing, they are quite convincing, it just suit the environment well. They'll tell you a little funny, but there's nothing like lots of crack jokes, or it's not more involved in like a bit of text saying, oh, you need to do this as part of a job and blah blah blah. It's not amazing, but it does the job, and it's very serviceable for the game that you're playing. The further you get in the game, you do actually get to return to Earth and get to see like a futuristic version of it. It's very, very interesting, and of course each area it's completely different. There's lots of enemies and traps, and I like the way that none of it feels, it's like once you see, like say, I think it was Another World where the enemy aliens are all very similar, they don't really change. Not here, it really does expand out, and as you go to each different area there's lots of different things. I mean, some of them do return of course, because you're dealing with humans and some limited alien interaction. There's a good spread throughout the levels. You never get to a point where you think, oh, it's them baddies again, I just have to face off to them. And they all have different actions. It's not like they've all got the same gun and they all stand, duck and shoot and stuff. They really are interactive. They've got slimy things that come across you at the floor, and robots like in the first level you'll see some different straight away. Robots which can electrocute you, and they always remind me of like a R2-D2. Or, no, what's that thing out of the new Star Wars film? My mind's gone blank, but you know the one that stuck its like thumb up with a blue light. And there's little aliens that do that sort of thing. See, this is already setting boundaries 20 odd years before the new episode of Star Wars. The thing is, the aliens can be gross, but they are familiar, and it's such a massive world to explore, and the fact that you get to talk to people, it's not just a standard action platform, there's a lot more going on in this, and they build this like amazing science fiction atmosphere. All the level designs and the sounds and the bit of music, like, unless my version was broken, but there wasn't very much music playing without it. I mean, I did play some of the official soundtrack earlier, the opening tune so to speak, but there's not very many mod files that I could find of the music throughout the game, and there seems to be about 20 to 30 different bits that I could actually find, but they're all like 10 to 15 seconds long, and they seem to be like responding to moments throughout the game, and like when you see the cutscenes and stuff. That's another thing I've not mentioned. I'm really sorry, I should have gone into that almost straight away. The cutscenes in this are absolutely amazing. They're almost film-like, and at the time it would have just blown people away. It's almost like Polygon style movements and running about and shooting and things, and there's lots of these dotted around through different moments of the games, and they're never more than like several, maybe 10 to 15 seconds long at a time. But when you see things like the ship chasing after Conrad on his bike and then crashing into the planet, and then further on as you get into the game and you start to explore and you get like interactions with people and slight little movies of things that are happening, and it's only very slight. It might be like, say, the ticking of a bomb going off, or a bit of animation for something that you've seen in the background, but it breaks the game out and it adds into this atmosphere, adding the fact that the story is really great at driving you forward, because you really want to find out what's going on, and the fact that you even get to go to Earth later on, it really does open up into this amazing environment and this fantastic science fiction era that they've built up. It's such a surprise that there was no like sequel to this again on the Amiga or any other systems, because they really did create something special with that world. And yes, I do know about Fade to Black, but it was next generation, PlayStation and so on, and it felt like that was more of a, we need to do a cash grab just to sell some 3D games. Let's have a look at some possible like franchises we could do and then return to it. But it's not a very good sequel. It's okay for its time, but compared to the original, it's not a great game or a great follow-on. All things aside, we do have to look at the bad points of the game. One thing in particular, even though there's quite a lot of different enemies and I like the way they work with the environments and stuff, they are a bit one note. I mean, in the sense that they move in very simplistic patterns. I mean, it's not like, say, Rick Dangerous, where you get the sense that those enemies are out to get you. they tend to stick very rigidly to the area that they're in. They will be responsive if you like drop onto the floor before you, but even if you're on a platform right above them and you're shooting like crazy or making some noise, they don't respond to it. It's only when you like drop into the vision, which is fair enough and stuff. They don't go out of the way to hunt you down, and they might have a patrol pattern moving backwards and forwards on a platform, and it's just a bit annoying. I can understand why, because there's so much going on, but it would have been nice for them to be just a bit more responsive and come directly for you each time, and maybe give you a bit more to do with the combat. But most of the time you're rolling into a section. You don't have to roll, I just like doing it because it's more action filmy. You come into them, you see the enemy, you shoot, you take them out, and that's it, they're done. And they can be quite difficult because some of them are quite accurate, and you're ducking up and down and from behind objects and things, which is great, but the enemies don't really do much more than that. They're not running after you. It's not like they'll come darting down a section of the screen and you have to clamber up on a platform above them or jump down and stuff like that. It's very, very rigid, and they get a bit stuck in the area. It does have a save system, and I don't even know if you can call it that, because it's more of a checkpoint thing. You can save the game, but only when the Amiga is turned on. If you got really far through a level and like you come out of the game or you reset the system and reload, it will sort of like let you load the stuff almost from RAM, but if you turn it off, it's gone. And there is a password system, and it's not too complicated, but it's very, very fiddly to put in, and you just think, why could they have just not let you had access to the disk drive? I mean, it's a computer. I mean, I suspect I know why. They were just trying to port this as quickly as possible and didn't want much of a difference between all the systems, but at the end of the day, we are on a computer. I know the DOS version is exactly the same. Everything is, it's all on this dodgy password system, unless some of the later ones, unless I've missed it, but all the ones I looked at, none of them had a proper saving ability. But all of the consoles could do this. They could have even put something in the cart or give you the option, but when you've got an easy accessible thing like that with a floppy disk drive, it's very, very frustrating. It's fantastic that you get the opportunity to actually talk to people and interact with the environment, but the problem is it's really, really limited. You only get very simple tasks for the job, carrying stuff from A to B, and it's great. I really enjoy the job section because you're involved in this city environment. You're going to different levels and moving through subways and stuff. There is like a train system. It's effectively just like it's instant transport, really. There's nothing more fantastic to it than that, but it feels like you're moving around this city environment, and it feels like there should be a huge map and things like that. When you're only going from A to B to deliver things effectively, it's annoying. It feels like they could have expanded that so much more and done, especially with the Amiga, or even on the original Mega Drive and Genesis version. They could have given us so much more to do. And I know it was based around building the mafia element up from Godfather, but it's a shame that there's nothing really that goes further or goes deeper. One other thing I did find a bit of a problem, and I suppose it's not fair in a way, because this game is built around like the animations and the amount of movements and stuff. When you're in the middle of a rapid gunfight and you need to turn around quickly or duck and stand up, Conrad takes a moment to do these movements, and it can take a couple of seconds to turn around or do this, and it's very frustrating. You're in the middle of this everyone's firing like you at crazy. You need to be doing this, you need to be doing that, and he takes a moment to do that, and you're completely vulnerable whilst all this is happening. It's not like, oh, you just turn around. It's like if they're shooting at you, Conrad doesn't turn around. It's like if someone was shooting at me from behind or throwing something at me that's hitting me on the back of the head, I'm not just going to take a moment and slowly turn around. You're going to spin round to some degree. There'll be a fair bit of speed. There's none of that, sadly, and you do need to plan your movements to be flexible to that sense. And again, is that a problem with the game? I'm not entirely sure, but I did find it frustrating in sections, especially later on in the game when they're a lot more accurate and you don't upgrade yourself or improve your skills or anything like that, so you've got to take a lot more time. So it's something I think they could have worked on. Another problem with it is you don't have any sort of like log or diary or any sort of overarching story that is driving you on in sections, especially when you try to work out the jobs and things. There's no clear instructions of what you're supposed to do. And it's great that you've got this amazing environment and everything's interactive and doing all these things around you. Sorry, I mean interactive in the sense that it's obvious where you need to go. Problem is, there's no overarching sort of guide or say, you've got a list of mission points here you've got to get through. You know you've got to get from A to B to do this, but like with the job system, it sort of abandons you there. They don't really give you the hint of, well, why are you doing these jobs? The story doesn't really go into any in-depth. You have an idea that he's lost his memory. You try to improve things. You try to get from point A to B, but there's nothing driving you forward. It's only when you get to specific moments and the story expands out, which is great, but in bits, from section to section, you would hope there'd be a bit more pushing you forward, and there just isn't. And again, it's just a bit disappointing. It's not a major problem with the game, but they could have done a bit more. And of course, as I said before, there was very little music on my playthrough, unless I just had a dodgy version. In my mind, it had all these big like science fiction scores and musical things going on, but there is very, very little music, and it just ruin it a bit. It's fantastic that you don't need the music whilst you're playing because there's enough going on with the environment, but again, this is the Amiga. I would have loved just to have some more musical notes going on, and it's very annoying like when you're in the jungle, the city, and the screen is just like quiet. There's no musical background, and there's the sound effects going off and the gunplay and things, but at times it's just not enough. You just need that little bit more. The magazines for this were really, really amazed with it. I don't know how else to describe it. Amiga Force gave it 96%, Amiga Computing 94%, The One at 93%, I think that's before they switched over to the out of 5 scores, Amiga Action 92%. They tend to be quite cruel with games like this and knock them down on score wise, but no, they loved it. See You Amiga, probably the lowest, 87%. They had similar issues to what I did, but again, that's a really, really good score. Amiga Power, 92%. So overall, the magazines absolutely loved it, and as you can probably tell, I had a very good time with it. One of the greatest things about it is just like roll, 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 roll like a ninja. It's so fast and fluid in the movements. It does have its problems with the combat and stuff. This is a proper Amiga smash hit, you know, this was a magazine cracker. This is an AMIGArama highly recommended game. I don't know, I still need to sort some sort of stamp for these. Let's just start putting it on the episode image. The graphics are gorgeous. I mean, I really can't put across how amazing it all looks. The futuristic environment, like the lushness of the jungles and the alien planets, as you go further and further through like the alien level, and it's all like this disgusting purple popping bubbles and things, and even when you're in the TV studio and all like the neon lights of it and the blue and the blacks and the way it all looks together, I can't describe to you how amazed I was by the graphics. It's a very, well, early to midlife Amiga game really, but they've gone overboard on this, and they did on the other systems. It really does look absolutely fantastic, and the further you get through the game and the more the levels open up and you see different areas and even like Earth and planets and things, it's mind-blowing. It just looks absolutely fantastic, and you'll probably feel the same as you're playing the game because you go to each section. It's just like you take moments. I mean, I do it all the time as I was playing it through again, and it's just like you pause and admire things, and even like the backgrounds all match well. It looks amazing. The best part of it all, though, for me, is the gunplay, because it just looks cool. In my mind, this is what gunplay should be about within an action game, you know? Because you feel like you're like Bruce Willis in Die Hard, rolling about on the floor and stuff and shooting at things, and they're all reacting to you. And it is limited, the combat, in some situations, especially with the animations. But most of the time, if you're quick to move and you plan it forward a bit, you can drop down from a platform, roll in and out of a situation, be firing left and right. It looks cool and awesome, and it just looks great. This is pretty much the pinnacle of action adventures on the Amiga. I'm sure some people will disagree with me, but I would say you pick some of them and come up to me in the comments or something, and you convince me that there's better games than this to this degree, with this sort of an art style on the Amiga. I won't have it because I've not seen anything like it. It's a fantastic conversion, and I suppose it's a port which might make it lazy, but most of the decent games tend to get ported to different systems and stuff. This needs to be played. If you've never played Flashback, just pause the show, go away and maybe come back for the last few minutes, but you will have a fantastic time with it. It really is an awesome game. Now, they have re-released, as I said before, on the Switch. That's very disappointing though. If you're going to go for that, either wait a bit till it comes down in price or go for the digital version, because I think it's $15 to $20 at the moment, which is actually fairly cheap, but especially on the Switch in particular, they seem to like re-release these things a month or so down the line on like a market sale. But do not not bother with like the box special edition, because it really is crummy, the amount of stuff that they've put in and what they could have done. I think there's like a USB extra or something, or a download file for like music and stuff, and all the way they've done all the extras in the box, none of it fits. It's all like they've got different people designing different parts and none of them have spoken to one another. You don't want to end up with this. This is an amazing Amiga game. It really does deserve to be appreciated, so please go and play it. And that seems like the perfect time to end on a high note. But before we disappear, let's thank this week's Patreon subscribers. First up, we have Adam Bradley. Again, a big thanks to all these guys. This show would not be possible without their help, especially with the new lot of audio equipment that we're recording the show on. Figgy/CTZ. He's very active on the Discord forum, so by all means, come and join in the conversation there. Graham Vebke, Jason Warnes, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage. Go and search them on Google. They do have a retro gaming website. It's a store. Retro Ravi, who I believe is behind the Retro Hour podcast. Amazing show, by the way. Sneff and Treble. If you'd like to come along, you can join them on patreon.com/AMIGArama, or you can come along to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AMIGArama, or pop along to see me on AMIGArama.com, or if you've got any comments on this show or just want to send me an email and stuff, I'm always looking for some sort of like reader questions, or I'd like to do some sort of section like that. And maybe you've got some questions to ask me about stuff I do on the Amiga, or I don't know, about games and things, just drop me a line. I'd love to read them out on the episode. I mean, hell, even so, if you want to record something special and send it along and I'll play it out on the actual episode, that could be interesting. Yeah, just drop me a line. It's Lorfarius@AMIGArama.com. Anyway, until next time, guys.